Okay, I think I'm going to start. Okay, so again, welcome to my session all about education in Barcelona. I have tried to gather together as much information that I think is useful for people who are going through the process of looking for a school themselves. It is a general overview of the Catalan education system rather than the Spanish education system because it differs in some ways. I'm not particularly going to go into the details of how it differs. But yes, this is particularly about Catalonia, but more actually about Barcelona. I'm not going to go into specifics about schools or specific schools. I know a few people asked me, sent questions beforehand, so thank you for that. But as I said, it's going to be more of a general overview. There is a chat function that I think some of us have found already. If you do have particular questions that come up while I'm speaking that you think, oh, that would be quite nice if that could be answered, I will try and answer things at the end. So I'm going to do my session and then I'll have a look at what people are saying in the chat if there is anything that you want to particularly know. If I don't manage to get through that and answer any of the questions you write in the chat, please feel free to contact me via my email address that you will see in the meeting registration link that you were sent. You can always contact me through that. Yeah, because I can imagine that you have lots of questions and hopefully lots of them get answered today, but maybe not all of them. Just again to remind you that this meeting is being recorded. So please keep your videos off and muted. And I think we're probably ready to go. Okay. So my name is Anya and I run My Barcelona School, which is a service for families who are looking for maybe nurseries or schools in Barcelona. When people ask me what exactly I do, a general way of talking about it is saying I'm like a relocation agent, but I specifically work with families who are looking for schools or nurseries. So I'm an expert in that area. How I came to do this is by training and experience. I'm a primary school teacher. I've worked in schools in the UK, in Spain, Germany, Holland, in both the public and the private school system. But I also come to this role as a mother who has gone through this process myself in Barcelona as a foreigner. So I understand that how complicated it can be, and I guess it came from a desire to support people in that process. Despite my very Dutch sounding name, I actually come from the UK and I've been in Barcelona for 10 years. I have two children and they obviously both go to school here. So it was an interesting process for me, and as it will be for you, I'm sure as well. Okay, I expect this part of the session, so the presentation part of the session, to take about half an hour to 40 minutes. It's quite a long time to be talking, and obviously there's at this stage of it, there's no interaction because I'm just going to give you a presentation. I'll try not to zip through everything, but I do appreciate that it's quite a long time to be listening. As I say, let's try and interact after the session in terms of if you have any questions or anything like that. A summary of what I'm going to be talking about. First, I'm going to do a brief summary of the education system. Then I'm going to be talking about, or at least explaining the three different types of schools that are here. And these are probably things you hear about quite often if you've already started researching. And then I'll be doing talking about what I consider important things to really take on board when you're looking for a school in Barcelona, particularly. These will cover things like curriculum, languages, fees, things like that. So there are things to take on board, but really it's a comparison of the different schooling types and how they differ or how they are similar based on the kind of school it is. And at the end, I will bring up some tips and suggestions of things I would consider important when you're looking for a school here, particularly in Barcelona, but maybe in some ways looking for school generally, the kind of questions you need to be asking yourself when you're doing that. Okay. All right. Firstly, a very brief summary of the Catalan education system. First of all, compulsory education in Catalonia and actually Spain as a whole spans from the age of when a child turns 6 to when a child turns 16. So before that age, school is non-compulsory. So you do not need to send your child to school if you don't want to. It's actually the child's year of birth that dictates what year group they will be in. So this can differ to quite a few other countries. So for example, a child born in 2015 will turn 6 in the this year, so 2021. So that means a child born in 2015 will go into first grade of primary in 2021, in September of 2021. That means children who are born in January are the oldest in the year group, and children born in December are the youngest in the year group. In terms of who oversees the education system, it's the government of Catalonia. But in Barcelona itself, there is a body that everyone talks about in terms of education called the Consorci, and they specifically focus on schools in Barcelona. So if you live in Sant Cugat or in the Maresme, there's different body that organize, well, it's actually the Generalitat who deals with your education processes in the public sector. The Consorci has offices throughout Barcelona, but the main one is in Plaça Oracanoa. And at the moment, it's a case of, well, it used to be you can phone up and get an appointment. You can still do that, but they've tried in the circumstances to make things online as much as possible. When I talk about 3 types of schooling, I am talking about concertadas, I'm talking about public schools, and I'm talking about private schools. Now, a public school is quite simply a state-funded school. A private school is a fee-paying school where the cost is usually on the families to pay. And the concertada is the one you often hear about because people, I guess many international families seem to have an interest more in concertadas. And basically they are privately run and managed schools, but they receive a portion of their fees from the Catalan government. And I will talk a little bit more about fees and funding in a little bit. Okay, I will go into more detail about how they differ and how they're similar to each other a little bit later. But first I'm going to share a screen. I'm going to, and excuse my not being able to do it directly. Let's share this. And this is about the educational stages in Catalonia. So there you have how it is divided up. This is specifically the public school system, and within that I group in the concertadas as well. It's divided up into different stages. Now I'll talk a little bit in more detail about the 0 to 3 year group. I'm just letting somebody in because I'm not going to go into much detail about that later. Okay. Between the ages of 0 and 3, families have many different choices about how their child can be looked after. Now, obviously, one way of looking after your child between that age is keeping them at home, and that's obviously fine. There are public nurseries. There's about just over 100 what we call escoles bressols, which are basically public nurseries that are overseen by the Consorci within Barcelona. So there's just over 100 within Barcelona, and there's also a handful of what is called llars d'infants, which are also early childcare provision, but they are run by the Generalitat. So you have those two, which are considered public nurseries. You do have to pay for them, they're not free. But generally, depending on what your income level is, they are slightly cheaper than private nurseries. Then you have private nurseries, which there are many. They come in very different types. You have ones that teach in certain languages, different philosophies. There's a whole host of different private nurseries out there, which basically many people go down that route. One of the reasons is because there aren't actually enough spaces in the public nurseries for everybody to get a place. So you cannot be guaranteed a place in a public nursery. Apart from public nurseries and private nurseries, people have a whole, it's very interesting in Barcelona, there are a whole host of other ways that children are looked after between the ages of 0 and 3, and actually also 0 and 6. There's Madres del Dia, so basically there will be a person who looks after a group of children off in their house. There's grupos de crianza, where a group of families come together and employ an educator to look after their children. There are many different options if you're looking for childcare for your child between the age of 0 and 3 years. So that's the period called Escola Bressol. Sometimes it's referred to as P0, P1, and P2, but that tends to be if the Escola Bressol is connected in some way to a school, because it goes along the naming of the school's stages as well. Okay. Then we next have the 3 to 6 year old group, and that's called Educación Infantil, and you have P3, P4, and P5. And basically, this period of education, this stage of education is not compulsory. You don't need to send your child to school at this age. But from the age of 3, so that is P3, everybody in Catalonia has the right to a free school place for their child. So what many families do is they think this is actually a really good time to get into the school that we really like. So they send their child to P3. Families can be a little bit reluctant to wait because they're concerned perhaps that there won't be any places left for their child after P3. And that is a genuine concern. It can happen that the classes get completely full, specifically in the public schools. It can be a bit easier to get a place out of P3 in the concertadas, and obviously there's private schools as well. Okay, from the age of 6, education is compulsory, and we have a period called Educación Primaria, which is basically primary education. It goes on for, it spans 6 years. So you start with 1st grade and finish at 6th grade. Then we go into ESO, or basically compulsory secondary education, and that's a 4-year program. And then we have post-compulsory education, which is the baccalaureate or vocational training. So students who wish to go on to university after their school career, they will be taking the baccalaureate. And I will be talking a little bit more about the different qualifications a little bit later on. Talking of, I was talking specifically about public schools here. Obviously, there are private schools as well. And in terms of the way that private schools divide up their year groups and name their year groups or their education stages, they can be a little bit different, but roughly they're in line with the age groups that we see here. Okay, I'm just going to stop the slide. Okay, there I am again. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through some of the similarities and differences, or what things that the different types of schools have in common. I think one of the main things that people know about schools and how the public schools, concertadas, and private schools are different is the way that they're funded. And as I mentioned before, we have public schools that are state funded. And what that basically means is it is tuition free. Families may be asked to contribute towards materials or school trips. They may be asked to buy certain things, for example, they call them batas, like the apron that they wear at school, but tuition is free. When it comes to the concertada, that changes a little bit. As I said, concertadas are privately owned schools and they're privately managed, but they do receive some of their funding from the government. And without going into details of what they actually have to do to fulfill that, they do have certain requirements that they need to fulfill to get that funding. In terms of what's the kind of payment you're looking at concertada, it varies between about 100 euros a month and about 500 euros a month, depending on the school. And the idea really is that that payment covers the extras that you receive in a concertada. So that might be, for example, an extra hour at school, because the concertadas generally have an extra hour more, an hour more than a public school. You may be asked to pay for certain things actually on top of that, as well as things like trips, occasionally materials, uniforms. There are certain costs associated, perhaps also in addition to the tuition fee. Something that I didn't actually mention before as well, which is important to know, is public schools are all secular, so they don't follow follow a particular religion, whereas concertadas may or may not be secular. Then we talk about private schools, and obviously private schools are fee-paying schools, and they don't receive any subsidies from the Catalan government. So the cost of tuition is generally covered by the families. Now, there may be particular schools where the fees are subsidized by a foreign government. So, for example, in Barcelona, just off the top of my head, we have the German school and the French school. What happens is that their fees are subsidized, but with it, they prioritize entry for families from their particular country. There may be subsidies for schools, private schools from religious orders, or also foundations as well. Okay. In terms of the fees for private school, well, there's a wide variety of different fees. Something very important to take on board if you are considering a private school is to see what the additional costs might be, because each school has their way of charging. You're going to obviously be charged for tuition fees, but there may be materials on top, there may be insurance, sometimes you have to pay extra for exams, application fees. The best thing to do if you are interested in particular private school, go onto their website, try and find it there. Sometimes they don't make the fees very clear to families. It can be a case that you actually have to call the school and do a visit before they give you the fees. But more and more they are putting their fees on the website. Okay, now another way that the concertadas, public schools and private schools maybe differ or have things in common is the curriculum and the qualifications that they follow. Now, all schools have to follow a curriculum that is approved by the Catalan government. So that's public concertadas and private schools. And this is all in accordance with the Spanish Educational Act. So there is a particular Spanish Education Act, and even though there may be slight differences to how this act is followed within the whole of Spain, it is very similar to what the Spanish curriculum is. Yes, exactly. So it's modified to an extent for the local population. Private schools, in the same way, need to have a curriculum that is authorized, even if the curriculum comes from a foreign country. In terms of the types of curriculum, you have the local curriculum, which is generally covered in, well, is always in public schools and concertadas. But in addition to that, you're also having within main school learning, you have the international baccalaureate programs. So we're talking about the primary years program and the middle years programs. And there are one or two schools that also follow the Cambridge International curriculum. So these are the types of curriculums you will find in different schools in Barcelona. Now, at the end of sixth of primary, public schools and concertadas, and actually some private schools, do a thing called competencias básicas. And what that is a chance to test the key skills of the children who are finishing that period of education. Now, these, unlike in some countries, I'm thinking specifically of the UK, these results are not made public in the way that some countries do it, in the sense that they get the results, but it's a like for like. So they are compared with schools that are similar to them. So perhaps with a similar demographic or a similar part of Barcelona. After a student finishes their 4 years of secondary teaching, they gain a certificate of completion called the GESO, and that allows them to move on to the next stage of learning, be it the baccalaureate or the vocational trainings. Now, those schools that do offer post-compulsory education, so what I'm talking about is learning from 16 years old, there is a whole host of different kinds of qualifications that they can do. The first one is the obvious one, is the local Spanish baccalaureate, and they have different types of that. Some schools, public schools, concertadas, and also private schools also offer Bachibac, which is a combination of Spanish baccalaureate and the French baccalaureate. There's also a handful of local schools or concertadas or publics that offer the international baccalaureate. Within the private schools, the international baccalaureate is one of the most popular types of qualifications that you can follow, but there are also schools that offer A-levels and also the local baccalaureate as well. Okay. Now, I'm going to talk next about languages, because this is something that comes up time and again with my clients when I'm talking to them about what kind of school that they're looking for, but also just generally in life in general in Barcelona, particularly with families that are from overseas. One of the biggest questions when you are choosing a school in Barcelona is what language you want your child to be schooled in. And the thing that perhaps, well, you probably know, but not everybody knows, is if you send your child to a concertada or a public school, the main language of instruction will be Catalan. So there will be some schools that perhaps teach more Spanish, maybe start it earlier, or speak or teach more in English, and they're considered trilingual schools. But the fact remains that the main language is Catalan in public schools and concertadas. If you are looking for a school that offers English and Spanish, or wholly in Spanish, a school offering instruction wholly in Spanish, I'm afraid that does not exist in Barcelona. It's very important when you go and visit schools, especially those schools, if you are particularly interested in language, those schools that are offering a trilingual, or talk about offering trilingual education, find out how many hours of each languages are taught per year group, because it often does change. It may be, for example, that English, they offer English as an immersion language infantil, but then you go to primary and it becomes less and less. It depends what your priorities are. Now, if you're looking to get away from Catalan as a language of instruction, or the main language of instruction, perhaps because you don't expect to be here long, there are many fee-paying or private or international schools on offer that teach in a variety of languages. The main language is English, so there will be many schools that the main language in the classroom is English, with Spanish generally taught as the first foreign language. But then you have schools that offer tuition in German, French, Italian, even Hebrew, Japanese. there are schools that offer these languages as well. As I said, Spanish is generally the first foreign language that is taught at the school. So when families come to me and ask me, you know, we would like to be exposed to more Spanish, I will generally say to them, if you want Spanish, you will generally have to choose a private school for your child. There are also local Spanish schools, i.e. schools that follow the local curriculum that teach in English. So you're not always getting a foreign curriculum. You can get the local curriculum, but it's taught entirely in English. Okay. A way that these schools very much differ is the application process. Well, two of them are very similar. The public school and the concertada, it's exactly the same process. However, even though they seem like quite different schools, they are exactly the same process. So if you are intending to apply for a place for your child for a public school or a concertada, the period to do so is around March for a September start. And there is a particular process called pre-inscription, or it's basically the enrollment process, pre-enrollment process. And how it works is if there are more applicants to spaces in the school that you want, so you have a choice of different schools that you can put in order of priority. If there are more applicants than places in the school that you want, they follow a strict process of points. So you get more points for certain things. For example, if you live in the catchment area of the school, you get 30 points. If you have a sibling that goes to the school, you get 40 points. It's not guaranteed that you will get a place if you are in the catchment area, but it certainly gives you more of a chance than if you are choosing a school outside of your catchment area. Additional points are given for a variety of reasons. If they're finding that families, you know, there's still families who want that school as their first choice, and there aren't enough spaces. From there, it goes to a lottery system if they still have to sort out who gets the places in that particular school. One thing that's really important to know, though, is if you don't get your first choice school, it goes down the list and they try and get you into one of the schools that you've put on your list. If you don't get into one of those schools, you are still guaranteed a place at a school in Barcelona. And as I said, that is from the age of 3 years old. Even though school isn't compulsory at that age, you are guaranteed a space somewhere in a school in Barcelona at that age group during that age period. Now, if you arrive in Barcelona mid-year, outside, you know, either in May or June, obviously you've missed the period of application. So you have to do a different thing. And this is where the consortia comes in, because they are the ones who know how many spaces are available. Or you come to me, and that's what I do often with families that coming out of the pre-inscription period, and I talk you through the options that you have in terms of spaces available and the kind of school that you're looking for. Now, in terms of application process for private schools, it works very differently. They have a rolling program, so it doesn't happen at one particular time of the year, although admittedly, they get much more busy around the March, April period. If they have spaces and you fulfill, or your child fulfills certain criteria, you have a place at that school. You have to contact the specific schools to talk to them directly about it. There is no central body that organizes that. Okay, now that's my whistle-stop tour of what I think is important about the education system here and things that you should know. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about what you should consider, or what I consider important when you're choosing a school in Barcelona. One thing is how long you're going to be here, and this is something that will affect many things. It may affect the curriculum you choose, but I guess the main thing that will affect perhaps is what language you will choose, or what school you will choose in terms of the language they teach in. So thought is you want your child to have a fluid transition from Barcelona to whatever place you're going to. That might determine what school you choose. If you're planning to stay here, perhaps you're thinking my child needs to learn Catalan or Spanish because they're living in Barcelona and we intend to stay here for a long time. Then you've got different choices to make. There's something to know about how it works in terms of the different stages of primary. I talked about the different stages. You've got infantil, you've got primary, and you've got secondary or ESO. Some schools offer schooling from 3 until 12 years old, and that's generally the public schools. So you have the smaller schools, they may have 2 or 3 lines or 2 or 3 form entry, but at the age of 12, your child will need to choose another school for secondary. Public primary schools often are affiliated with secondary schools. That's all. I mean, it's a complicated process in the sense it's constantly changing, but in theory, when you choose a school, you can see which school your primary school is affiliated with, and that will give you direct right of entry into that school. So if you're somebody who doesn't know what they're doing and perhaps doesn't know if you're going to be staying in the area or not, perhaps a public primary school will be fine because you don't even know if you're going to be here at secondary age or not. Whereas that's generally the public schools. In the concertadas, there's a mixture, but often concertadas will run from 3 up until 16 years old or 3 up until 18 years old. So that basically means that you have a school for life, if that's what you want. Obviously, you can change the school midway if you want, but that's something to think about. In terms of private schools, there's a whole host of differences. You're obviously getting private nurseries. You're also getting provision for children from 0 to 6 now, which didn't really happen in the past. But families are finding that they found 3 too early to start in the big schools. So nurseries and early childhood centres started to offer a different stage of learning for children. So you're having that stage, you're having from 3 to 12, 3 to 16, and 3 to 18. So the different stages. So obviously it's something to think about when you're looking at the school. What is the kind of thing that you want for your family? Do you want to stay in the same school, or are you okay to make a change at 12 years old? Something very important is where do you want to live? Now, obviously, you can always commute to a school. In terms of public and concertada, this will possibly affect your priority points, so you need to think about that. But if you're looking for a private school, for example, many of the private schools are on the outskirts of Barcelona or out of Barcelona. Are you prepared if you're living in the center of Barcelona, are you prepared for your child to get on a school bus every morning? Or would you prefer to live in that area? These are things it's important to think about, because the commute to school can, some families don't mind it, they're used to it, others it's much more important. So you need to think about where you want to live. You can always move, but it is something to take on board. If you're not from here, when you go to the schools, is there somebody, and perhaps you don't speak Spanish or Catalan, is there somebody on the staff who will be able to communicate with you about your child? It's all fine if everything is going well, your child comes home happy, but it would be good to know if there is a point of contact for you to be able to speak more fluently or speak your own language. Obviously, if you speak Catalan or Spanish, that's not an issue. But I know with many of my families, it's something that's very important to them. Also, in terms of your child, if your child is entering into the school system and they're younger, it's not so much of a problem. The children are just learning to speak. But perhaps if they're a little bit older and they don't yet speak Spanish or Catalan, how are they going to be incorporated into the school? How are they going to be supported in their learning of the language? Something important to know, if you don't know already, is that children that are new to Spanish and Catalan have the right to additional support in the languages when they enter a school. It's called kind of, I'm trying to think what it's called in Catalan, but it's like a welcome session or welcome sessions, and that can last anything from a month to a few months of the school year. So it's a way of integrating the children more into the school. If your school doesn't seem to be doing it with your child, ask them what they are doing. You might find that they feel that your child is doing perfectly well without it, but it's definitely worth talking to the school about if you haven't done so already. If there is anything particular that is important to you about a school or your child's transition into a school, it's really important to ask. For some schools, it's very obvious the way they do things. They've always been doing it. Lots of people who come from outside of Catalonia or Spain, they have a different way of doing things with their kids. Schools are run perhaps slightly differently. Don't assume that everybody does things exactly the same way as you do. And feel free to ask, or if you're finding it difficult to communicate, make sure that you find somebody who can ask those questions. For example, something that is often a preoccupation for families with younger children when they're entering primary school is, what is that period of adaptation or that period of transition? How is it going to be in the first few days, few weeks when my child first enters school? It's something that not only people from overseas ask, it's a question I hear time and time again at the open days for new schools or open days for schools. Schools are used to answering these questions. Don't be ashamed, don't feel bad about asking. If it's important to you, it's really good to know how the school responds to the question that you are asking. Okay, those were the notes that I had that I thought near enough gave an overview of the kind of things that I think are important to know about the education system. I hope those points have been useful. I'm going to have a look if there's any chat questions. I'm actually going to do this and have a read. Please feel free to use the time now to type any questions that you may have. Okay, I'm going to read this question. Can you change the school once you are enlisted somewhere? What is the process? Can you enlist for a different school than the current one during the March registration process? In it, an example, let me have a look again. An example, be in a school for 1 year and choose first. Okay, I think I understand that question. I'm not 100% sure. Basically, if you have gone through the pre-inscription process, which is the period that happens in March, that we're just finishing at the moment, which is the period of matriculation, you have put on your application form, you have put a number of schools from, you've got a choice from 1 to 10. So if you choose a school that is your top one and you don't get into that, you move down the list to, if you don't get into that one, it goes into the second one, it goes into the third one, fourth one, until hopefully one of these schools still has places. Within the pre-inscription period or this period, you cannot change those schools. It's only the ones that are on your particular list. If you are placed in a school that you're not happy with, perhaps it wasn't on your list, then you can go to the consortium and make a complaint about it and talk to them specifically about it. But at this point in time, you cannot change the order of your list or anything like that. If you decide to that you are going to go to the school that has been given to you and you're not happy with the school, you can change the school for the next year, but you would need to go through the whole period of pre-inscription again. I think that might be the answer, but if you want to contact me after the meeting, Let me know if I haven't answered that particular question. Okay. Okay, and this is from Nina. How is the public P3 school for such little children? Is it already school-like? Sit down, writing, etc. I find them so young at age 3. I completely understand your concerns. Yes. Well, I would say certainly it depends entirely on the school. Something that is really exciting about Barcelona, and actually why I love the job that I do, and I'm always learning, is the fact that there is room for change. And what has happened is that there has been a kind of a group of schools and families who are basically saying, we find P3 very young for children to go to school, and the kind of things that we are expecting the children to do sometimes are not appropriate for the ages. So what's happened is that many schools are adopting a much more play-based and child-focused curriculum for children of P3, P4 and P5. It really is a case of going to the schools, going to the open days and saying to them, you know, what kind of things will my child be doing in a school day? Because there are many schools that have really caught on to this idea. It did feel a little bit when I moved here with my children. I actually was quite shocked at what I was seeing when I was going round looking at P3 classes. I found big tables, children sitting around, all children doing the same thing at the age of 3. They were wonderfully behaved, but for me, that's, as a primary school teacher, it's not what I expect at that age group. I see that less and less now, I have to be honest. I think schools are adapting, schools are learning, and it really is a case of going and visiting schools and actually having a look at the kind of things that they are doing in the P3 day. There are, I mean, one of the focuses, they're not particularly focusing on reading and writing. There is a lot of learning how to be autonomous, learning skills that will help them in their primary school career. There are tables, but there are, you know, there are things that we consider school-like, but some schools have really gone outside of that. There are obviously lots of other types of schooling as well. It doesn't necessarily just need to be primary school, public schooling or concertada schooling. There excuse me, there are private schools that have a completely different approach to this age group. It's about having a look and finding out. Okay, let me have a look at this one. Okay, what happens if they're still in nappies? Mine will only be 2 years, 9 months at the beginning of P3. I understand they prefer children to be toilet trained, bearing in mind the staff pupil ratio, but surely they make exceptions for something so developmental. It depends where you choose. I know I've said this before, but it really is a case of finding the right school. Now, I have to say something about this. I understand completely because my son was very late in terms of, or what is considered late in terms of being toilet trained. And actually what we decided to do was to wait a term before starting him in P3. So he started later than other children, because I felt it was too much of a rush. This was a personal decision that I could make for my family. Not everybody can make that. The difficulty is in P3, simply enough, often there are not enough members of staff to be able to deal with it, because some schools will say in the first month or 2 months, we're going to have 2 members of staff in P3, but in many schools, there will just be 1 teacher for 25 pupils. And I'm talking generally about the public school system and the concertada system. So if there is a child that needs to be toilet trained or is having accidents in the course of the school day, the teacher is simply not able to care for that child during that period. That is really generally my understanding of the reason why it's like that. But yes, it is a case of perhaps finding a school that does enable your child to go at their own pace, not be forced into it. You know, it is what it is with your own personal situation. I understand exactly what you mean. It does seem very early, but again, it's about choosing the school that is able to adapt to your particular circumstances. Okay, let's have a look. Is there a website or database with all schools listed in Barcelona? Yes, there is. Well, actually, if you're talking about public and concertadas, the main place is the Consortium website. And I did actually have a slide prepared for you. But actually what I'm going to do instead is at the end of this meeting or in the next day or so, I will send an email out to all participants of the meeting, and within it, I will put the Consortium website. I will put the Department of Education website, and within that, particularly in the Consortium website, it's a case of searching the different areas to find out what schools are there. Now that's the public schools and the concertadas. In terms of the private schools, there is, as far as I know, no database that covers it all. There is a very helpful booklet that was organized by, I believe, Barcelona Activa or one of these organizations that is called something like Introducing a School in Barcelona or International Schools in Barcelona or something like that. And that has a list of most of them, not all of them. I'm happy to link that document to the email as well if people would find that helpful. Okay, let's have a look. Is there anything? Okay, can you start a term late in the public schools or would you lose your place? I think it is a case of going to the school and asking, but it's pretty tricky. Yes, because the public schools are very oversubscribed. Generally, I'm always shocked if I find a public school with a place outside of the normal application period. So it would be a case of asking the school, but with a public school, it's quite unlikely. I have to say that. Sorry. If a child went to an international kindergarten, guarderia, does it make sense to continue with a private school when it comes to compulsory education? Okay, I think this one, I am very happy to have a conversation about this one afterwards, but I think this is a bit beyond the scope of general schooling. Please feel free to contact me outside of the meeting time and we can talk about that a little bit more. Okay. Okay, and to keep. Okay, how do the education, I think this might be a little bit beyond it as well. How do the educational professionals view unschooled children entering the education system? We've had the opportunity to keep our daughter now at home. Naturally, we have joined activities with other unschooling families, so we have a lot of social contact. Okay, if your daughter is 4 years old, schooling is non-compulsory at 4 anyway. So the schools don't view it in any particular way. There may be particular private schools that are asking for some kind of report from their nursery or guarderia or something like that. But that's a case by case basis in terms of private schools. In terms of the public schools and the concertadas, for them, it doesn't matter at all. There is no relevance to it. Should we consider Catalan lessons as in someone native to play with them in Catalan in advance of starting P3 to help with adaptation? My children don't speak Spanish or Catalan yet. A really good question. I can see that I've only got a few minutes left. I would say the more exposure as a final point, and as I say, if there's anybody with many more questions, please feel free to contact me via my email address. I would say as a general point, the more exposure the child can have to the new language, the better. Perhaps a very kind person looking after your child that they have a good bond with rather than pull out lessons. Although I'm not a great one for TV, I try and stop my children from being on the TV all the time or looking at things on the iPad. I do think showing different cartoons, things in Catalan, help songs, because they'll be coming across lots of different kinds of songs and music in the early years, things that maybe when they're at school, they start to recognize some of the songs perhaps that you've heard at home. But yes, I would say any exposure is great, but don't worry too much about it. I don't think it's anything to really stress about. We've all gone through that. My children entered the system speaking really no Catalan. It took them, you know, it wasn't immediate, as some people say, but it's possible. And as long as you're not concerned about it and try not to show your anxiety about the fact that they don't speak yet, at the end of the day, a 3-year-old, many 3-year-olds aren't really speaking that much at this point anyway. So I wouldn't worry so much about it. Okay. I'm afraid that's going to, is really the end of the session. We've got a couple of minutes left for me just to say goodbye and to thank you all very much for joining me today. I hope it wasn't too much of a bombardment of information. As I say, I will contact you after the meeting. I hope that is helpful to give you some links to important organizations to know about in terms of the public school system. And I will attach that document about international schools, which gives you a rundown of how it works, a little bit like what I've been talking about today, but also a list of private schools or international schools in Barcelona. And yes, I wish you luck on your journey, and perhaps we'll meet again soon. Okay, thank you very much. Bye.